And with that as an outline to start our discussion, let me introduce Glen to you. He hosts his own radio program on 104.7 on Saturday mornings, and he is the founder of Free Markets and several other companies that have been fantastically successful. So we will depend on your business acumen during the rest of this show, okay?
Well, thanks, Chris. It's great to be here.
All right. What do you think, first of all, of what the Obama administration is doing with the big auto manufacturers, particularly forcing out Mr. Wagner at GM?
Well, I think two things. I think Rick Wagner needed to go. I thought that for a long time. I've done business with General Motors in the past, and I just think that they're not well managed, and I think that he needed to go. That being said, I think it's a very negative step that the President of the United States had to fire, or had the power to fire, the CEO of General Motors. I think that it's an unfortunate step because it shows that the government has intervened in the economy in a way that really is unprecedented in our history.
But what should the government do? Should the government just step back and let capitalism have its way until the ship rights itself?
Well, I think in this case specifically, General Motors and Chrysler were bankrupt. They were insolvent. That means they had their expenses were more. They didn't have enough cash to meet their payments in December. And we have a legal process. There's rule of law on this. There's a lot of law. It's the Chapter 11. It's not bankruptcy like everything's going to shut down. It's Chapter 11 bankruptcy, where if a company can't meet its payments, it goes into Chapter 11. All the shareholders are washed out, and the court supervises a reorganization. That's what U.S. Air did. That's what the whole airline industry has gone through, except for Southwest Airlines. But virtually every other airline has gone through that. Many steel companies have gone through that.
And survived.
And survived. And the thing is that in order to restructure a company that is insolvent, you've got to go through some process, and our law handles that, and it's the Chapter 11 bankruptcy laws. And unfortunately, President Bush, and I fault him for this, they didn't, I talked to a senior government official back in December. The Republican administration, at the end of the Bush administration, they did not want to have the stain on their record of General Motors and Chrysler having gone out of business under their watch. And so they kept it alive. They spent, $17 billion of our tax money to keep GM and Chrysler alive in December, and they said there was an end of March deadline that they had to come back with this restructuring. But really what should have happened is that these two companies should have gone into bankruptcy in December. That's what's going to happen anyway because they're insolvent. There's no way these two companies can function.
No amount of taxpayer dollars can bail them out.
Well, we could continue to spend maybe $30–50 billion a year to prop them up, but what that would be doing is it would be all of us subsidizing companies that just can't pay their own way.
But aren't we doing that with the financial companies right now and the banks? Aren't we just pouring billions of taxpayer dollars into them? Is there any hope of them being bailed out? Why don't we let them go bankrupt in that orderly procedure that you're talking about now?
I think we should. I think we should. I think that the notion that the government has to step in, the executive branch and the Congress have to step in and prop up a bunch of private companies is really bad for us in the long run.
Then how should we maintain this? Everybody says it's going to be painful either way that we go, that long term, if we keep pouring tax dollars into these companies, GM, the banks, everybody else, our grandchildren will suffer for it in the long term. The government has this printing press, and they just keep printing money and throwing into it, and it'll lead to hyperinflation. If we do nothing, it's kind of like the Hoover administration, and we just get laissez-faire. Capitalism will right itself, but that will mean a painful long-term depression. Either way we go, it does not look good. What would you do if you were in charge?
Well, I don't think. The reason we got into a depression under Hoover was because of a trade bill called Smoot-Hawley. So we increased, this is before the depression started, Hoover and Congress decided that we needed trade protection. And they increased tariffs across the board on everything, 300%. And what that effectively did was shut down international trade. So we stopped buying anything from abroad, and our trading partners, the Europeans and Japanese, stopped shipping anything to us. And that took about 10% out of the economy right away. And that's how the Great Depression started. And then we didn't have banking regulations. We didn't have any kind of safety net. There was no unemployment insurance. There was, oh, and then the other thing the government did back then was they constricted money supply. They thought the problem was inflation, when in fact it was deflation. So there was no real, the predecessor to the Federal Reserve back in 1929-30 constricted money supply. They took money out of the banking system. And so they made every mistake they could possibly make, and that's what landed us in depression.
All right, so
we're in a totally different situation now.
You favor NAFTA and GATT and all those international trade relations, opening up all those markets, forgive the term free markets, I don't mean your former company, but you prefer that kind of trading in open markets.
Well, I think that yes, I mean, the short answer is yes, but when it's a tough sell because people see the plant down the street that closes. But the reality is that the more trade we have, the more jobs we create overall. You know, when George Bush had the restrictions on, put the tariffs on steel back in, I guess, 2003, 2004, it created a lot of job loss in other parts of the economy. So everything is connected, and there's ripple effects every which way. And when government tries to step in and make decisions for private businesses, they make decisions based on politics.
Laissez-faire, hands off from the government. Is that what you say?
No, the government, like the reason that the car makers are still not in a Chapter 11 bankruptcy proceeding right now is because George Bush and then Barack Obama have wanted to keep them out of that status to preserve the union contracts that are in place. That's not economics, that's politics.
Okay.